You know that in the previous, have you started? Yes, okay. So in the previous chapters we studied terms like displacement and distance. What's the difference between them? What's the difference between displacement and distance? Huh?
One is the shortest and one made.
Okay. Anyone else? What's the difference between?
Basically, distance between 2 points and displacement is actually shortest distance between 2 points.
Okay. Anyone else? Hanji. Anyone else?
One is scalar, one is vector.
Yes, very good. So, one is a scalar and one is a vector. So, if we write scalars and vectors, ये हिल रहा है बोर्ड नहीं ये हिल रहा है ये देखो ये फ्लिकर प्रोजेक्टर हिल रहा है ना अच्छा so distance where should I write distance scalar distance is a scalar displacement is a vector okay give me another example yes huh
Only magnitude and area.
okay give me two quantities give me a quantity and tell me if it's a scalar or a vector please put it on your nose and pinch the pin here it should be tight okay I have to speak you don't even have to speak so it's not a problem okay give me an example of a quantity okay अब आपने और नहीं देना right so speed is a scalar velocity is a vector okay so what will be the definition of speed and what will be the definition of velocity what's the main difference here who will answer this yes what is the main difference between let's say displacement and distance yes we did discuss this in the last chapter as well right
Velocity is the rate of change of displacement while speed is the distance covered in a specific time.
yes okay for the simplest definition for a vector you need to specify the direction okay for a scalar you only need the magnitude plus the unit that's the main difference right okay so let's look at chapter number 3 this is okay in this case okay another thing is the representation of a vector when we want to represent a vector we normally put an arrow on the top of the vector again it differs from in different books in some books they use a bold font to represent a vector and in some books you use an arrow and when you are writing it yourself it's better to use an arrow to be careful okay right so for example if you have a vector A you will represent it with the arrow and in this case as you can see you do have this so if I maximize this you will see this is a vector A B and this is the vector sum right okay now once we have defined vectors now we will try to work with vectors. So one of the simplest things you can do is to add a vector. First we'll talk about the addition of vectors, then we'll talk about the subtraction of vectors, and then we can talk about the multiplication of vectors. So when you multiply two numbers, you simply multiply them because they are scalar. So you have to do nothing. You just have to write the magnitude and the unit. But so the first chapter was about units, right? The second chapter was about motion, and we were using these terms which are displacement, distance, velocity and speed. But now we are going to also understand which quantities are vectors and how we can add them, how we can क्या नहीं हो रहा?